Welcome to Vampires and Mermaids. I'm Erin.
I'm Risha. All right, I think mine might end up being a little shorter than normal, which I think might be good because I accidentally found out what you were doing.
And mine's going to be a whole ride.
Ooh, I'm excited.
Yay.
Really excited.
So no, this works out perfect.
Good. So we, as far as vampires go, are going to go to Germany, to Glenhausen, which is a town. It's a little village in Germany. It's really near Frankfurt. We're going to talk about Clara Geisslerin, and this was in 1597. Long time ago. She, in that year, collapsed and died after confessing she was a blood drinker and a witch.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm. And it was pretty common at the time for witches, or accused witches, to be also accused of blood drinking. They were kind of synonymous with each other. So you were a vampire witch in the late 1500s. If you were a witch, you were likely a vampire too. And just like vampires, witches were burned for their alleged crimes at the time. She was burned too, even though she collapsed and died.
And that was on her own, right? Like she wasn't...
I'll get to it.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you good. She was burned, but less fortunately, where most people were burned alive, she was burned after death. So less unfortunately, I guess.
More fortunately?
Yeah.
Fortunately.
Yeah, but less unfortunate.
Isn't that just fortunate?
Yeah, but no, because you could be pretty, neutral is less unfortunate sometimes.
In a way. Luckily for her, she was already dead when she got burned. But it still sucks she got burned?
Yes.
Okay.
So to her accusation, Clara was accused of blood drinking, but she was also accused of prostitution with 3 devils, countless murders, digging up graves of children to drink their blood. And because of this, she was tortured on the rack. She would confess, but then claim innocence as soon as she was taken off. And it kept cycling through that.
Okay. It's making sense now.
Mm-hmm. So she was, tortured until she confessed to consorting with the devil who visited her in the shape of cats, dogs, and worms. Got a little bestiality going on there.
Oh, wait, visited her consorting like that. Oh.
Yep. She confessed to giving birth to about 17 children conceived with the devil lovers, murdered them, and drank their blood.
Wow.
And that was the last one that she confessed before she died. So in my mind, I'm thinking about who's torturing her and who's asking her these questions and getting those answers. Because I'm guessing it's not coming from her brain.
I would sure think not, unless every time she'd say anything, that's not enough. Give us more.
Right.
And she
just had to come up.
Right.
Ugh.
Oh.
But the judicial report from...
I'm sorry, there was a judicial report for this? You're telling me this was like a court thing?
From August 23rd, 1597, quote, "The devil would not let her reveal anything more, and so wrung her neck," unquote.
The devil. The devil, not the guy you have purposefully torturing her, or the judicious system that's in place. The devil. Isn't that a little bit of like pointing a finger at yourself there? Like, we're torturing this girl. She died. It was the devil.
The devil killed her because she couldn't confess more.
I feel like look in the mirror there, my bro. Oh, what the fuck?
So I've always been kind of curious about how common this was, because I feel like it's gone into lore.
Sure.
And so to find the judicial report, I was kind of like, oh my gosh, it's more real now.
I just hate thinking that there was a judiciary system in place. Judicial system. There we go. I speak one language and I speak it poorly. That just feels like this should be a very Salem witch trial, pointing fingers. The preacher's wife had a rumor, point a finger. There is no law. So the fact that there actually was a system
right.
for this is
Well,
disgusting.
And that it was commonplace to torture common people.
To get them to confess, and if they
Yeah.
didn't confess, you kept... Because you're just... Oh, you're just guilty immediately.
Just
Perfect.
Just like torturing them into telling you what you want to hear.
That's not exactly efficient.
And the rack, it's this medieval device that was used well into the 17th century. It was brought into the Tower of London for the first time you really see it recorded, I guess, in history was 1420 in the Tower of London by a guy named John Holland, who was the second Duke of Exeter, if I'm saying that right, I don't know, and Constable of the Tower of London, and he famously used it to torture specifically women.
Right.
And it was nicknamed the Duke of Exeter's daughter.
The rack? Ew.
Right?
Ew, why did we make it familial?
Nasty. Yeah, it's gross. But, I mean, thankfully that's not a common torture device. I'm not going to go into the details of how it works because you could look that up. I've seen it on Robin Hood, Princess of Thieves with Keira Knightley. I think that's the one I'm remembering correctly.
I have not seen that.
I grew up with a lot of different Robin Hoods.
That's fair. I had the fox one.
Yeah.
Oh, he was a fine looking fox. Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
One of my favorite Disney movies for sure.
That's fair.
It's a good one. And then the final little tidbit of knowledge I have is because I wanted to look up how common witch trials were at the time. In southwest Germany, so it's a little more southwest than what this town was. This town was pretty central. Frankfurt is fairly central, and Glenhausen is right close to Frankfurt. Between 1561 and 1670, there were 480 witch trials, and 317 of those occurred in Catholic areas, 163 in Protestant. So at least 3,229 persons were executed in that time frame.
That is a high execution rate.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it was almost 100 years. It was 89 years. But I feel like that's a lot for witch trials.
I mean, just executions in general. That's a lot.
Yeah, but
and then when you specifically witch trials, which is all, or at least vast majority, women. And then you throw in that it's a largely Catholic element too.
Uh-huh.
It would not be appropriate for this podcast necessarily, but it could be a fun little tidbit or tangent one day about like the Mary versus Mary. You know, you have Mary Magdalene versus the Virgin Mary, and how especially, I mean, Christianity as a whole and a lot of other religions too, but especially Catholicism very much has, there are two options for women.
Yes.
You are the Virgin Mary and you are perfect and pure, or you are Mary Magdalene and you are
the worker
and kind of dirty and not pure. So I just think that's interesting. It comes back around to the Catholic views on women, especially in the...
See, I find that interesting the way you say that, because I've never heard that in reference to Catholicism, because whenever we talked about Mary and Magdalene, it was we need Marys and we need Mary Magdalenes.
Oh, and this might be regional too, or I don't know. I definitely don't want to speak for like the whole Catholic Church, obviously.
Right.
I was very much taught, and I went to Catholic school, that Mary Magdalene she was the example of a sinner who was forgiven by Jesus. She was one of the lucky ones of, see, no matter how far you've fallen, it's okay. Jesus can still love you if you find your way to him. I actually have an interesting book. Maybe that'll be on my, we might be starting a little Erin's book review section of this podcast, but maybe when I read it, I will let you know if I hear anything. But it's called Mary Magdalene Revealed, I think. And it talks about how in different translations of the Bible and older ones, she's totally represented differently than the current ones. Yeah. And that her relationship with Christ and just her as a person was probably totally different than what the modern Catholic Church specifically has painted her to be. Mm-hmm. So I'm really intrigued to read that. But I don't know. I feel like the Mary versus Mary perspective speaks very strongly to these women probably stepped out of line slightly.
Yeah.
Or who knows how much, but they stepped out of the perfect expectation set by the church that was probably unattainable anyway, and they got tortured and murdered for it, and that's just disgusting.
They are vampires because of
Yes.
it. Yep.
Yes. I don't even know what they probably did to deserve that, because no one deserves that. But, oh, that's just messed up.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, how do I transition this to manatees?
I know. I feel like I've been very, very down the last
Yours
several
are sad.
I'll find a whimsical one for next time for you.
Lies. No, you won't. It's okay. I'll keep popping in with the mermaids. We probably should have expected this when we started the podcast.
That's true. I mean, me generally, I tend to go macabre anyways.
That's fair.
So.
I go with the shiny glittery thing. Well, I will also be talking about stupid men in the mid-century era.
No.
Specifically, we're starting with Christopher Columbus in 1493. So for anyone who's listening from not the States, we should maybe just give a quick summary of why we go, ugh, or why I call him a stupid man. We are in the United States of America, and it was at one point found by Europeans, the area, by a man named Christopher Columbus, allegedly. This is like the 1400s, so who really knows?
He's trying to find India.
And he thought he did when he got to the U.S. We're not in the same area, by the way. Go look on a map if you don't know. We're not. To the point that he called the native people Indians because he thought he was in India, and this lasted for way too long. He proceeded to treat the native people like absolute garbage, and he was just kind of a trash human in general. Don't worry, though. We're the United States, and we still decided to have a holiday named after him until recently. I guess in some states it still is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, some states have both.
Yeah, now it's Indigenous Peoples Day, which is so much better. But this absolute idiot of a man, Christopher Columbus, who thought the Americas was India, made a journal entry on one of his voyages in 1493, and it is, quote, "Yesterday, when I was going to the Rio del Oro, I saw 3 sirens that came up very high out of the sea. They were not as beautiful as they are painted, since in some ways they have the face of a man," end quote. This is because they were probably manatees.
Oh my
Now, we
goodness.
obviously don't have, we're not sure of that, but he was in an area that manatees travel quite frequently, and in conditions that would be totally right to see them. Also, from a distance, it's very reasonable that you would think a manatee is a person. They do have kind of human-like features, sort of in the face.
Thinking like a mustachy kind of face.
They have thick whiskers too, and their tails, they can kind of flap out of the water. There are 2 different types of manatees. One has a paddle tail. Manatees have a paddle tail. Their close cousin, I think it's called the dugong or something.
Dugong?
Dugong?
That's a Pokemon.
Dugong. D-U-G-O-N-G. They have a fluked tail like a whale.
Wait, I'm sorry. Is a dugong an actual animal?
Dugong?
That looks like dugong. That's a Pokemon.
Tell me of this Pokemon. First off, we have to tangent to the Pokemon.
Yeah, I'm going to pull up a picture for you.
While you do that, the dugong, we're going to get into a whole biology lesson here pretty soon.
I love it.
But they are kind of the essentially the cousins of the manatees. We're going to be focusing mainly on manatees.
No, it's like D-E-W, dugong.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the Pokemon. See?
Oh, yeah, I could see it.
It's like one of those with a horn. But there is, what you just said, the
D-U-G-O-N-G?
Yeah, that one. It looks like a it looks like a naked roll mat. A naked roll mat? A naked mole rat.
And that's kind of what manatees do look like. And you can pull up a regular picture of just like a manatee. For anyone listening, check out our Instagram. So they are a close cousin, but it's likely that Christopher Columbus just saw one of those was most likely a manatee.
Amazing.
Similarly, in 1614, another...
No, I'm sorry. I see the paddle...
Yeah!
Versus like the whale-like...
Isn't that cool?
Fluke? Is that what you said?
That's what I read it as.
That's fun.
Right? I kind of like that. So like I said, we'll mostly be talking about manatees specifically, but those are a relative cousin. Another stupid white man in 1614, John Smith.
Oh, dear.
Oh, yes. And yes, the John Smith of Pocahontas. The Disney movie is not an accurate representation for that relationship. If you want more information, research it yourself. She was a child. Big problems.
They tried to redeem it in the second one, but that just made anybody who saw the first one mad.
Well, John Smith wrote in one of his journals while sailing, quote, Her long green hair imparted to her an original character by no means unattractive, end quote. And he'd also wrote, he had, in relation to this quote, this mermaid, he thought he saw, quote, begun to experience the first effects of love, end quote. Now you might be wondering, I assume you all know what a manatee looks like, and if you haven't, you've looked it up by now. How? How is this possible? There are a few different factors that might lead sailors at these times to think they're mermaids. First off, mermaids were a very popular tale between sailors. They were A-T-A-L-E, a very popular story, or yes, a popular tale, if we want to think I was smart enough to come up with that pun. There were often stories about mermaids being swapped back and forth among sailors. There's a lot of folklore and stories surrounding them. Also, a lot of maps at that time were very embellished and not necessarily accurate, but they're often embellished with pictures of things you might encounter on the sea. So like krakens.
Oh my goodness. Ooh.
Or maybe whales, which are real, or mermaids. And so these guys probably had this image in their head. Mm-hmm. They've also been at sea for a really, really long time and have only seen other dudes and only seen a ship. I also don't know how good prescription eyewear was back then, but I can't imagine it was great. So there's probably more people with vision problems than we originally think about. And then some people said on resources online that they were, quote, starved for intimacy. That's problematic on its own, but we won't get into that. Or just it was stemming from a need of contact.
What about scurvy?
I don't know a ton about scurvy. I know it weakens ligaments in your body.
Is it hallucinogenic? I don't know.
Could honestly, well, and also between different diseases, it's possible that there was some hallucinogenics or hallucinations going on. There also is probably a large amount of drinking.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's because they needed clean stuff to drink, and a lot of time the alcohol stuff was the clean stuff that wouldn't get you sick.
Well, there you go. So if you have people with potentially crap eyewear drunk on a boat where they've only ever seen the boat and other sailors for the last month or so, you're going to start seeing some things. And a manatee just might end up looking like a beautiful woman or man in the case of Christopher Columbus. So that's kind of some of the lore around manatees and how they were confused with mermaids. We're going to get a little bit more into actual manatee facts. I'm very excited for this.
I am too.
I have a animal science degree, and this is definitely my corner. I don't know marine life super well. I'm more focused on livestock, but we're going to have a little biology lesson.
Yay.
First off, I just want to talk about how manatees and all animals and all technically living beings are classified. So we have a specific way of classifying everything. It's called a taxonomic system. This breaks down, you might have had to memorize this in like 8th grade biology, to the domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Risha's nodding. Yes, we remember this. So for example, if you're not familiar with this, it's kind of like a family tree where you break things down into smaller and smaller and smaller groups based on traits that they might have. Now, to qualify to even be in this system, you have to have, or whatever's being classified has to have, organelles. So that means their cells have to have what are essentially cell organs for a simplified way, but they have to have things going on in their cell that have designated jobs.
Like the mitochondria.
The powerhouse of the cell. Yes, like the mitochondria or the nucleus or ribosomes. Yeah. And they also have to perform metabolic activity. So intaking one type of energy to output a different type of energy.
Plants on this?
Plants are on this.
Oh.
Yes. So for example, viruses are not. It is hotly debated whether viruses are considered living or not living, but they do not have, I don't think they have organelles, and they don't perform metabolic activity. I don't remember. They don't meet the basic requirements, so they're not considered living. The domain is the first thing that we break them down into. So everything in these categorizations are either eukaryotic, archaic, or archaean, or bacteria. So that's how we separate out our eukaryotes and our bacteria and some of our other stuff. You and I and manatees and plants are all eukaryotic. So those are some of like the cell pictures you had to memorize. It's essentially a type of cell. Then we go to their kingdom. That's the next separation. There are protozoa, chromista, fungi, plantae. So that's where your plants would go. And animalia. So that is actually where we, our listeners, you, I, our pets, Manatees are all in the Animalia. Those units get more and more and more specific. It's going to seem like a tangent, but it's a nerd fact, and I do use it to kind of explain the manatees. But a really great example of this that we're familiar with is Canis lupus. So eventually we break it down until it's just the order and the family, and then that's the scientific name of something. So a wolf is known as Canis lupus because they belong to the order Canis and the family Lupus. I also maybe did a project on this in 4-H about wolves, so I might be stole that. But this is in comparison or contrast to Canis Canidae. Now that's like your common household dog or domesticated dog. So that's how we can differentiate. They're similar, but they're different. So if we compare wolves and manatees, for example, when we're breaking it down, they obviously both belong to that Animalia. They both then belong to the phylum, and this is where, please forgive me for my pronunciations, because this does get a little sketchy. Chordata. They both belong to that one. That's based on you have to have like a bilateral symmetry, so an arm on each side, a leg on each side, that kind of thing, a closed nervous system, and there are a whole bunch of other traits as well. That's a good basic one. Their class, both of them are mammalias, so they are mammals just like us. They give birth to live offspring. They produce food for their offspring. There's a few other traits as well. But where they differ is wolves belong to the order carnivore, so full meat eaters. And this is the fun thing. Manatees belong to the order Sirenia, which looks like siren.
That's fun.
Right? I don't know what the background of that or how it was named that, but they actually belong to the order Sirenia, Sirenia.
Why?
That's what they named that order, I guess. Yeah, so from that order then, we do have their family. So that's their scientific name is Sirenia, and then their family name. There were 4 different families of Sirenia. Only 2 are still around. 2 other ones are extinct, which is really sad. But the other one is how did you say it? The dugong?
Dugong, yeah.
The dugong. Well, they are their own family. And then the manatees, and there are actually 4 species of manatees, are in the other family. Trichichidae, I think.
Sure, it's Latin, probably.
Probably. So they are, Sirenia trichichidae. And then a little bit of facts about the manatee. They weigh anywhere between 880 to 1,200 pounds or 400 to 550 kilograms. In length, they are typically around 3 meters or 9 to 10 feet long. But the largest manatee on record was 4.6 meters and 15 feet and 1 inch. And it weighed 1,775 kilograms or 3,913 pounds.
I think I'm having a weird moment here where I didn't realize they were that big. And I blame VeggieTales.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I didn't even go into the VeggieTale manatees.
The Barbara manatee.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to tangent into a different little kid manatee, but that one would have been so much better. Yeah, they are large. I actually was fortunate enough to get to swim with one when I was in like 8th grade. It was very cool. It was one who had been rescued from a injury, and so he or she, I don't remember, ended up in a rehabilitation area, and we were brought in and got to swim with them and be educated about them, and they're preserving them as a species, which we'll talk a little bit about too, but they are very large. I remember thinking that one was quite big, but I mean, that's 2 of my horses and then some for weight. And 15 feet, I mean, that's you and I stacked on top of each other and not
even
no,
getting to it. Yeah.
No, and that's obviously like excessively large,
Right.
like a third larger than the regular, but still kind of crazy to think about. We discussed earlier the paddle-shaped tail of the manatee versus the fluked one of their cousin. And then something kind of interesting about them is they don't have any canines. They only eat vegetables, or specifically seagrass, or if they're in captivity, lettuce.
Sure.
They eat a lot of leafy greens, so they have to grind their teeth. So they have like our molars in the back of our mouth. So those work when you have a full mouth of those by grinding together. Fun thing about how their teeth come in, though, is they continually get new teeth throughout their lifetime. They're not like humans who have 2 sets, but new ones will come in the back. And they have about 6 adjaws, so 6 on top, 6 on bottom. New ones will pop in the back and then slowly rotate forward and push the front teeth out, like a couple at a time. So that's how they get new teeth.
That sounds painful.
I know. But at the same time, losing your baby teeth wasn't painful. And they pop out.
I think baby teeth going away hurts.
Does it?
Yeah.
Oh, mine didn't hurt.
Oh, mine felt like ripping.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
My mom didn't make me tear them out, though. I just got
they
to,
just
like,
fell?
yeah, my mom let me just sit and wiggle it and wiggle it and wiggle it. Another interesting thing, and this is my second biology lesson, is that they are cecal fermenters. So what this means is you may ask, why can a horse or a cow or a manatee eat things like grass or seagrass and we cannot? It is because our bodies cannot break down the cellulose in those grasses. We can eat things like lettuce or spinach because they're really low in cellulose. So that's that tough structural material found in like tough grasses. Spinach and stuff like that doesn't have it as much, so therefore our salivary amylase or our spit is able to start that breakdown process earlier, and all the other amylases that our body secretes are able to help break down that produce and other things we eat. We cannot do that to cellulose, but cattle and grazing animals like manatees can. That is because they do fermentation. So yes, kind of like wine or beer, if that's what you're thinking about. In cattle specifically, you might hear that they have 4 stomachs. That is not true. They have a 4-chambered stomach. Your dad has probably informed you of this, but the largest and first chamber of their stomach is a rumen, and that is where they ruminate or ferment. So they have little microbes, so tiny little microscopic bugs essentially who help break down the food. They have a whole biosystem inside their stomach that can help produce heat and break down and ferment the cellulose and the other plant structures. I know there's one other that I'm blanking on, but helps them break that down and then create that into something that is digestible through the rest of the intestine. Now, manatees don't have a 4-chambered stomach. They are actually built very similarly to horses. And that is where the cecal fermenters come in. So horses, manatees, and I believe rabbits are all cecal fermenters. And what this means is that they have a cecum further back in their intestine. Eventually, the fermentation happens in the cecum, which are essentially 2 chambers off of the intestine that goes into, and that's where the microbials break down your cellulose and your plant matter. So they are still fermenting it, but it's in a totally different part of their body.
Is that why they are like colicky? Is that what?
Not necessarily colic. That's a good question. Cows can technically colic too. It can be caused by a lot of different things, including like gas buildup. But great tangent. Sometimes the longer your intestinal system gets, the more likely is that could get flipped. That's where colic is really bad, is if the stomach flips. Yeah. But colic can happen for any number of reasons. It can be just gas, too strong of feed, not enough feed.
Now I'm worried that manatees are out there being all colicky and nobody's out there to help them with their stomach flips like you got to do with horses.
Honestly, they're usually better left off alone. Oh, okay. And you should be a lot more worried about a lot of other things with manatees.
Oh, no.
But we'll get to that in a second.
Oh, no.
But, so they're cecal fermenters. So in my mind, I'm picturing, okay, the average manatee weighs 800 to 1,200 pounds. 1,200 pounds is a pretty average weight for a typical horse, which is also a cecal fermenter. So I'm picturing their intestines and their digestive systems look pretty similar. They do, except the average horse's intestinal matter, so from throat to excretion, so throat to anus, is about 20 meters long. The average manatee's is about 45 meters long.
Whew.
They have an insane amount of intestinal tract for the size of them. Like, even as large as they are, it's an extraordinary amount. I'm not sure why. I don't know if that's to help with absorption, because they do have a very low caloric diet.
Okay.
But just a whole lot of intestine shoved in a very cute little fishy body. As I mentioned earlier, they eat primarily seagrass. There was a situation, I want to say it was 2021 in Florida, where they had very limited seagrass, and the state of Florida started throwing an astronomical amount of romaine and iceberg lettuce into the water to help feed them. Yeah, so they're commonly seen in captivity eating lettuce. I started Googling manatees and mermaids.
Yeah.
And something popped up that was manatees and mermaids, the last chocolate. And I went, what the heck is that? Yep, so I clicked on it. And that is 10 minutes of my life I'm never going to get back.
Oh, no.
Because it's a Dr. Seuss episode. Yes, a TV show.
What?
I didn't know was a thing either, where the Cat in the Hat takes, I think, like Sally and Nick or something, these two little kids, around on adventures and teach them about the world. It honestly is like off-brand Magic School Bus. I don't know which came first, but that was the vibe it was giving me. But I wish it would have been Miss Frizzle teaching me. But it was kind of interesting. The voices were terrible and it was very cheesy. But they did do a really neat job talking about how manatees move and some of the current threats manatees are facing. If you're asking, where does The Last Chocolate come from? Well, guess what? They're not the same episode. They're just two episodes that get shoved together in one video.
Oh, no.
And I'd already lost like 10 to 12 minutes of my life, so I didn't watch The Last Chocolate.
It wasn't relevant.
I'm sure it was about there was one chocolate and they had to share and life is hard, get over it. They did an excellent job describing how manatees move. They move very, very slowly. They don't rush. They take their time. They're large. They're just kind of vibing. The manatee actually doesn't have any natural predators.
Yeah.
And so they just kind of go around and eat. They have a pretty laid back lifestyle when they're left to themselves. They also are built in such a way that they cannot rotate their head the way we can. So they cannot look to see what's coming.
Aww.
Right. So they've actually learned, or they were designed, I guess, to be able to tuck their fins and spin very quickly, though. So if they have to look, they have to turn their entire body to look. Kind of like my French bulldog, who has no neck. Manatees only typically have one calf at a time. Twins are very, very rare. And they only have one calf every 2 to 5 years. So similar to humans, or even slower than a lot slower than some humans I know. So they do not reproduce quickly. They do not move quickly. Everything about them is very slow. They naturally live where their food is, which is seagrass in these shallow waters. So a lot of waterways, kind of some more swampy, not swampy, but I don't know, like when you picture Florida, like the Everglades and the mangroves, like kind of in a very waterway vibe. The problem is this is prime real estate for humans. We like our beaches. We like our shallow water. We like to throw our docks up and go boating, which is fine until you have a spinning prop in the water going 30 miles an hour and a slow little manatee just trying to eat. So unfortunately, manatees right now are not considered endangered. They're considered threatened. That was a decision made in 2017, and it was hotly debated by scientists, and a lot of people really think they should be put back on the endangered list. Have not been thriving. In fact, 2021 and 2022, Florida, which is a state in the U.S. that has a very large manatee population, one of the largest in the world, so that's why I keep talking about them, had a two-year record for the number of manatee deaths. In those 2 years, over 2,000 manatees died, which is over 20% of the overall Florida manatee population. These deaths were from one of two, we'll break it into 3 reasons. The main reason is starvation, and that can come from natural loss of habitat, like I said, those waterfront properties being so high in demand, and also from algae blooms. I've only experienced one algae bloom. I was living in Wisconsin at the time, and I couldn't go in the lake because there was this huge algae bloom. And I didn't really know a lot about it, but I did not know until today that they are caused, an increased amount of them at least, are caused from sewage, manure, and agricultural runoff being put in the water. So they do happen, but it's been happening consistently more. And that's toxic to a lot of animals. Like if there's an algae bloom, you can't go swimming, your dogs can't go swimming. Imagine what happens to the animals who are in the water. And that absolutely destroys their food sources and they end up starving. And then the next biggest killer, or at least injurer, of manatees are collisions with boat props. They actually talked about that in a very kid-friendly way in the Dr. Seuss video. It was just kind of a telescope bonking one on the head, and they talked about you need to slow down. But I thought it was cool that they at least mentioned it. Manatees are really, really cool. They're really sweet and very social, even with people in the wild. Like I said, they don't have any natural predators. They have no reason to be afraid. Mm-hmm. And they're just a really neat creature. And apparently they're so beautiful, John Smith fell in love with them. So if you want to help prevent the downfall of the manatee and help preserve them, the best things you can do are, if you're in their habitat, slow your boat down, take your time to get out to that deeper water where they are not. Educate yourself and learn more about these animals and how you can help preserve their habitat. And if you are able, you can always donate. There are tons of different resources and foundations online. I'm not going to recommend any because I didn't get into the nitty gritty of ones that I've looked at, but those are some great ways to help protect our manatees or our real life mermaids.
See, I didn't know that was their habitat was so close to the docks. I knew that they were there a lot. That's the only time I've ever seen a manatee was when I was on a dock in North Carolina.
Yeah, so
that's where they live.
Exactly. That's their home and that's where they eat. And that's unfortunately also where a lot of our runoff is and where people spend a lot of their time. So when you mentioned earlier that you worried about the manatees in the wild colicking or something, they really are left typically better to their own devices. Humans are usually the ones who come in and screw it up. Kind of like Christopher Columbus coming in and screwing up what he should have just left alone. So yeah, and that's not to say that there isn't a place where we can all coincide happily, but just something to keep in mind. And if you're in an area that you're lucky enough to be near manatees, just educate yourself on how to protect them. We are not. It's -6 here today.
Yeah.
That's Fahrenheit. I don't even know what that comes out to in Celsius.
Oh, I can't do the conversion.
Cold.
In my head. Yeah, it's just cold.
Cold.
Yeah.
So we do not have manatees here.
No.
But yeah, that's what I have. That was our little biology lesson today. Please excuse my pronunciations, but I really like manatees.
They're sweet.
Cute. They're sweet. And that's why I was so mad because you sent me an Instagram last night about manatees. I didn't even watch it. I opened my DMs from you and I looked through and the first one that popped was a manatee and I just shut the whole app. I'm like, Risha.
It was so cute because if they're sleeping, they still need to breathe. And so they wake up and go up to the surface, take an inhale, and then they like face plant back into the sand because they fall asleep on the way back down.
Oh, if you heard that bonk, it was my face hitting the microphone because that's so cute.
It's adorable.
Oh, they're just precious. I did see an actual video too, but they did show in the Cat in a Hat TV show, which was so weird, and I guess I can link it. They'll use their little flippers to walk along the bottom. Like they'll just kind of float. Oh, sorry. I have one more manatee fact for you and then we can be done. I didn't write it down because I'm like, I won't forget this. And I did. I mentioned earlier that they have one calf every 2 to 5 years.
Yeah.
What I did not mention is that they have 2 teats and they are located in their armpits. Didn't expect that, but they are. They're located underneath their little flippers. And I don't know why that's so cute.
That is cute, and I'm sure it helps with
keeps
protecting
them,
its sensitivity and
that's
stuff.
fair. Keeps them very aerodynamic. You don't have them out and about. They're already in a nook, I guess. I don't know, but the nook teats. But yeah, they use their little flippers to walk along the bottom of the water, and that's just the cutest thing.
That is sweet.
Witch trials and manatees, man. So what's wrong with the world?
We need to cover their tails and watch their necks.
And hopefully we'll see the manatees next week. Yeah. But we'll see you next week. Bye.
Obscurantism and obfuscation.
Orally observed, gentle listener.
Gentle listener.
Gentle listener.
Gentle listener.
Obviated objects of oblivion.
Obambulating about.
Offered unto you.
Offered unto you.
Offered unto you.
In the Tapestry Radio Network.
TapestryRadio.org.
From our fancy to yours.